Most of you know who I am. I'm Nicholas. I'm the author of Whacky and many other extensions. I have been developing software for Joomla since it was actually called Mambo. And today I want to talk to you about toxic code, as in code that works, but also breaks a lot of things. And so you don't think that I am just here telling everybody that they're doing it wrong. I have done many of those things myself and figured out why they were wrong. So let's start with the first and obvious problem, which is that some extension developers believe that the only thing that exists in Joomla is the site and the administrator applications. As of Joomla 4, there are actually 5 applications. There is the site application, which is the front end of the site, what your visitors see, the administrator application, all right. There is the CLI application, which is a new application out of Joomla 4, but actually kind of existed in Joomla 3 if you would write your own CLI scripts. There is the API application, which only sends out JSON data. And there is, of course, the installation application, but we can ignore it because it doesn't load any of our third-party extensions. This is the Joomla web installer. If you're developing an extension, especially a plugin, please remember that there is at least the CLI in the API application. Excuse me. So you need to be cognizant of that. If you're not in the site application, it does not automatically mean that you're in the administrator application, and vice versa. Many developers assume that Joomla can only output HTML. Only HTML, nothing but HTML, but this couldn't be further away from the truth. Joomla already, since actually version 1.5 and possibly 1.0, can output much more than just HTML. For example, you could be outputting JSON that you're going to perhaps use in an AJAX request. You could be outputting binary data, such as dynamically generated images, or exporting stuff in binary formats like PDF files with invoices or Excel files with stock lists and so forth. And of course, you could have arbitrary files which are sent to your browser by download or file managers like Akiba release system or Docman or Foca download or e-commerce extensions and so forth and so on. So if you are creating especially a plugin which assumes automatically that by virtue of running in Joomla, you're going to be in an HTML document and it starts outputting stuff and starts making assumptions about what the document object looks like, you have broken Joomla. And this is something that I have seen on also many plugins that it's really painful. The next problem is that Joomla's on content events, like on Content Prepare, despite their name, they are not just to handle core content articles. They are there to handle any kind of data from all extensions. The subject that we're passing to these events is an object. It's always an object. It's not necessarily a standard class object with article data. It can be anything. The only way to know what it is to examine the context, which is passed in most events, and usually tells you which extension and data type you're being passed. Or whenever you are in an event which is handling a form, you can query the form name to figure out what kind of data you're receiving. If it is not something that you can explicitly handle, then don't. Also remember that when it's core content, you may be passed a page variable. When these events are issued by third-party extensions, you might not even get anything in the page variable, which is the last argument of your method. So make sure that you expect this value to not exist at all. Conversely, if you are writing your own component, make sure that you're using a context that is exclusively used by your own component. Don't reuse something that's used by the Joomla core or another third-party extension. The only case where you would use a context that's used by the core is if you're using on content prepare to replace plugin codes in content, but in this case, just use the HTML helper. And this is the most technical of the slides in this presentation. So don't worry, it gets better. Many extensions seem to have a blatant disregard for any other third-party JavaScript. What I mean with that is that extensions make an assumption that the only thing that is going to execute on the page client side is going to be Joomla's own core JavaScript and this extension's JavaScript, nothing else, in this order. They do not have any kind of error checking. They might even be missing a closing semicolon and a new line when they finish sending an inline script, which means that any other inline script that you send to the browser is going to break everything on the page. Or conversely, they might try to do things in a very general manner, like they're going to hook on the click event of all buttons on the page, regardless of where that button is and which extension it belongs to. It might belong to a component or module that has different semantics for this kind of patterns. So if you're writing an extension, you need to remember that your extension is not the only thing that's going to be running on the page at the time, and you need to play nice with everybody else. Because if you're breaking someone else's code, then you will be the one receiving the bug report ultimately. Too many extensions, especially modules, seem to be leaking generic CSS classes. What I mean by that is that you may have, excuse me, apparently the cat is contagious even through a web meeting. Wow. Some extensions might be...
I have 6 cats here. There's 6 cats.
I only have the 2, but yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
The air quality is really bad tonight.
Sorry.
It's all right. Some extensions try to style very generic elements, like all button elements on the page, or very generic CSS classes like BTN. Again, it's a form of the extension developer assuming that there is nothing else on the site but their own extension. So what happens is that this, let's say, module is displayed on a page with another developer's component, and the other developer's component layout seems broken, but it's not the... Ooh, excuse me. It's not a problem of the other extension developer because they're doing it right. They have their correct CSS. The problem is that your extension is leaking out styling for such generic things that it will break anything else on the page. The solution to that is to contain your extensions output inside a div, which has an ID or CSS class that's specific to your extension, and have your CSS style things targeting only whatever is inside the div. And another benefit from doing that is that you have CSS rules with higher specificity, which means that you don't need to slap bang important on every rule that you write like you're a kid. You can write correct CSS. And so a comment passing on my screen that you shouldn't be styling generic patterns and let the template handle that. This is not always the case. For example, in social login, you have a use case where you need to be able to style each pattern differently. Like the login with Facebook needs to have a specific shade of blue and a specific logo. The login with Twitter needs to have a different shade of blue and a different logo. And these are requirements imposed by the third-party services that you're integrating with. So you cannot demand that the template expects this use case. So yeah, sometimes you need to style some generic elements in a specific way. Some extensions can affect core functionality. You all know the term of a core hack. The obvious definition of a core hack is that you're changing files that belong to Joomla and replacing them with your own modified versions. But this is not the only case of a core hack. There are some, let's say, soft core hacks. For example, you may be preloading a class that has the same name as a core Joomla class. And as a result, Joomla is going to be using your class, not in this case, you have overridden the core, so it is a core hack. You may be writing a custom database driver or an HTTP class that's returned by the HTTP factory, or really anything else that is returned by one of the factories available in Joomla. If you have done it so that a generic call to the factory is returning your object, then a developer trying to use that factory is no longer using Joomla core code, they are using yours. So if there are any kind of these soft core hacks, you always need to warn your users clearly and in advance that this happens, so they have an idea that what they're running is a slightly modified version of Joomla, and they can use that information when contacting third-party extension developers when they have a problem. Whenever you're doing one of those soft core hacks, the code that you are presenting, its interface must match exactly what is available by Joomla itself. If you have a different method signature, then of course, anything trying to use it will break. And most importantly, do not try to disguise the fact that you are providing a different kind of object than what is offered by Joomla by pretending that it is core Joomla. And I'm going to call Palang out by name because they're totally doing that. You're on PHP 7 or PHP 8, and they tell you that their modified database driver has the name of MySQL. And as you all know, the old MySQL driver cannot possibly run on Joomla 7, on PHP 7 or PHP 8. It's not available. So imagine my surprise when during the migration to PHP 7 back in 2015, I saw PHP 7.0 sites reporting that they are using the MySQL driver because someone thought that it was a good idea to make their software pretend to be something it's not. So don't do that. Every time you hear pause, it's me cutting, so don't worry. Some extensions seem to have their own templating system, and I see that primarily in components. Just remember that Joomla gives you many ways to create templates and layouts which have all the features you need. Like you can also override them by category. You don't need to reinvent that very round wheel and make it square. I don't care if you think that your system is better. The fact that it's non-standard means that the site integrator has to learn. The site integrator has to learn something entirely new and figure out how it works so they can do something pretty standard like a template override. This makes the site integrator's job a nightmare, and I have seen this in real time. Don't try to use a different template language like Twig or Blade. I have done that. People hate it, even if the template language is better for us developers, or we think that it's easier for site integrators. Site integrators value standardization. They like to work with things which work in one way, and they always work the same way. And if you are going to reinvent the wheel, regardless of any advice, regardless of logic, do warn your users clearly in advance. Don't bury this information somewhere in a documentation page that nobody's going to read. Because many site integrators would much rather not use your extension than have to spend the additional time to figure out how your extension's output can be overridden. Sticking on the same subject, I have seen extensions which do use Joomla's view layout system, directly including a file, a view template file, by path, instead of having a way to override it. For example, the wrong way is to say require once, say path component, TMPL, my view, their PHP. This means that when a site integrator tries to override this view template, they're like, okay, if I want to also override their PHP and I have put in the correct directory, why is it not being used? It's not being used because your direct file inclusion always refers to the components copy of the file and ignores template overrides. There is the one true Joomla way to do that. The code that I have written here is if you want to load a different layout from the same view inside your view template. The suggested way, though, is to use sub-templates. So you would just use $this, load template, whatever, and it would load default underscore whatever .php, either from the component or from the template override. So don't try to be too smart. Just use the core. The core is the standard way, and everybody understands how it works. Now we're going to go into a category of problematic code, which has proven to be a major nuisance to the point that it can completely derail a side project. Using JavaScript, like Vue or React, to render content on the page instead of using Joomla View templates. The problem is that working with Vue or React or whatever have you requires a completely different skill set from the site integrator than working with standard PHP Vue templates. Even if they have that skill set, it's far slower to work with it than with Vue templates. And I'm not talking about just making the changes, but also testing the changes because of the different way that you may need to precompile some of that stuff or reload the page, etc., etc. And that is if the extension developer has even thought of providing a way to override the default layout. There are also some sites which need the basic functionality of the site to be available without using JavaScript. Sometimes it is an actual requirement on the site. It could be either because of performance reason or because the target audience is very likely to be on shared computers which block JavaScript by default. Another issue is that all these JavaScript frameworks, they are written for convenience in mind, and they rarely meet accessibility standards, which instantly disqualifies this extension from being used with many, if not all, public sector sites and many medium to large business projects, especially in the US where they have the ADA law. Another problem is that the life cycle of those third-party JavaScript frameworks is very different to Joomla. It's not under the control of either Joomla or the extension developer, which means that eventually you'll have to start introducing backwards compatibility breaks in the middle of your extension development cycle, or you're going to be stuck with old versions of that JavaScript framework, which might even have security vulnerabilities. And I'm going to tell you that Joomla stupidly does that with a media manager. At least it's mostly in the backend, but it's also kind of leaked in the front end. So I would say stay away from JavaScript unless you run a JavaScript shop, in which case, what are you doing with Joomla anyway? This is something really funny that I have seen a couple of times, a bespoke translation system, which wouldn't normally cross your mind, right? Joomla is using in-house for translations. And yet, I have seen some extensions which try to use getText, just like WordPress does, because they're like, this is better, this is standard. No, it's actually dog poop. If you have ever worked with getText, it was optimized for software development in the 90s. It is 2023. It still survives because of all the software that's already using it. First of all, it doesn't allow you to have the same word, which can be either a noun or a verb in a different context unless you manually specify that context. So I don't know, like I'm thinking allow and publish, but they're really not nouns. Like read and read, which are both written the same way in English. If you try to translate that, let's say in French or Greek, you would be using a different word depending on whether you're using this as a verb or as a noun. So this is very confusing for the translator. Whenever in doubt, use any files to translate your extension, just like we do in Joomla. If you're not in doubt, just use the core, use any files, don't use anything else. I haven't seen this one for about a decade, but last time I saw it, I was like, what the actual? I have seen extensions trying to reinvent Joomla plugins without using Joomla plugins. What I mean is, some extension needed a conditional feature, which could be installed additionally to the main extension and could be turned on or off. Normally, you would use a plugin. Normally, you would use a plugin in your own plugin group, install it, and manage it through Joomla. Just have Joomla handle all the events, no problem. So instead of doing that, which is simple and straightforward, the extension developer chose to implement their own system, which had to do event handling, event dispatching, plugin installation, plugin configuration, plugin activation, plugin deactivation, and uninstallation, which is like trying to reinvent an already very round wheel. If you ever find yourself in this kind of situation, just use plugins. They have been there since Joomla was called Mambo, and they work really, really well. Many extensions, not many, few extensions actually, have a really wacky installation and update experience. For example, I don't know if Kunena still does that, but at least a few years ago, when you would try to install Kunena, you would download a zip file, which installed a component and a zip file, and then they use the post-installation message to use that component to extract the zip file in Joomla, which is like, why? It's not faster, it's not more resilient, it's actually far more prone to failure than using the standard Joomla installation method. And it would only work if you were only trying to install or update Kunena and nothing else at the same time through a web browser. Some extensions are using their own updater, but there is no need for that. Joomla has supported updating extensions since Joomla 1.6, and it added support for paid extensions since Joomla 3.2, which was more than a decade ago. Since Joomla 4.0, it even provides a way to manage download keys for paid extensions, so you do not need to write your own updater. You shouldn't write your own updater, you should just use the core. And finally, you need to remember that Joomla no longer just runs on the web. There is also a command line client, which means that you can use the command line client to install or update extensions. And if you're trying to do clever let's say, things with your installation and updates, they will fail in these use cases, which means that your extension can no longer be installed or updated through all core supported avenues. So don't do that, use the core. And finally, this is my personal favorite demon, is those extensions which do not think it necessary to clean up after themselves after you uninstall them. They leave behind everything, all the database tables, all of the users' data, all additional things they added to Joomla, like content types, everything. Here's what I want to say to this. You do not know better than the user. When the user explicitly requests that you uninstall the extension, they mean uninstall it and clean out everything. Your extension is not the most important or central part of the user's site. If it really is and the user chooses to uninstall it anyway, well, as per the Unix adage, if the user is asking you to shoot their feet off, it's not your job to deny that. Your job is to provide the biggest, meanest foot gun that will shoot their feet right clean off. Okay? So if they want to do something stupid and remove the central part of the site, so be it. They should have backups. Have you put a table there? It's your responsibility to remove it. Have you added a content type to Joomla? It's your responsibility to remove it too. And please, whenever you're installing your extension, do not make changes to the core database schema. Don't create or modify fields. Don't change the collection of the table. Don't change the table engine, because this is a core hack. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of things that have been going on in the chat. Do we have any specific questions? You covered several things that irritate me and several things that I've done that are irritating.
About some of the comments that I'm reading, yes, when I said Peter, I was talking about regular labs, but he already knows that. It was a friendly job. His updater, that is not actually an updater, it's just interfacing with Joomla's updater. It's a remnant of Tails Pass.
I must admit, I've been finding quite a few components and systems that I've used in the past, which the developer has disappeared. It's not updated anymore, and moving from Joomla 3 to Joomla 4, they've broken. They will not uninstall. They literally didn't think about anyone not wanting to uninstall their component.
It's not that. When you move to Joomla 4, it might actually be impossible to uninstall an extension that was designed for Joomla 3 only.
No, I mean before I do the installation. So when I'm in my Joomla 3 testing, and I'm still in Joomla 3, I'm trying to clear these things out because they're not needed anymore. So I've been doing a lot of housekeeping before I do my migrations. And I've come across several which basically they either leave the tables or worse still, they leave parts of themselves, and you get these error messages saying cannot uninstall. Obviously, once you move to Joomla 4, you've got no chance of uninstalling them because they probably use his site and his admin and all of that sort of thing.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. If you already moved to Joomla 4, you're screwed because you have the post installation script, but if you want to be smart in those cases, just delete the post-installation script. So Joomla will try to find it. It doesn't find it. It doesn't throw an error. It just continues with an installation happily. It's like, yes, sure, of course I'm going to do it. The script that you told me to use after the extension, before and after the extension installation doesn't exist, so I'm just not going to use it. This is a trick that I have used in some of my very old extensions that were very much for Joomla 3, long before Joomla 4 development started. So you're talking about extensions from 2016 or before. Someone had them installed still on their site. Like I've seen a site with Joomla 4 site with Akiba Backup 5. And they were like, how do I install it? I'm like, that's an excellent question. Let me try and get back to you. And I discovered that, sure, you can delete the script file and then it just uninstalls. But yeah, there are some extensions that were written as though nobody would ever want to install them because clearly they're the most important thing in the universe, right? Why would anyone want to install it? Yeah.
Yeah.
In this
that has been
this case, you just go medieval. You know, you just start removing tables manually. You just start removing files manually and trying to modify the database. And you're like, what was this person thinking? Maybe that's why they no longer develop extensions.
Owen's got some points. Owen, do you want to just say yours out? I can see a little debate going on between Owen and Richard.
I just said it'd be great if there's an option because you said about not removing the tables.
Coming through very quiet, Owen.
How's that better?
Take that mic out your
That's
ear.
better.
Yeah, put the mic out of my hair and put it in my mouth. Yeah. You said about removing the tables when uninstalling, and I thought, yeah, that's great. But sometimes you might need to uninstall and reinstall, and you might not want to lose your data, right? So it might be great if there's an option to ask, do you want to delete the tables right now or not?
Can I reverse the question and ask you what is the use case of wanting to uninstall an extension and leave the tables?
If you're going to reinstall it again straight away, if the code is not working for some reason, but you want to clear the code out and start again, but you don't want to lose your data, or if you sometimes like component creator required you to uninstall it and reinstall from scratch, but if you've already created data, you might want to keep it.
If I can just add
two things. Since these are two use cases, I cannot trust them. The first use case is invalid.
Well, it could be that Owen's hacked the code and therefore wants the tables left. I'm not saying Owen would, but if Owen, let's say, had hacked the code and then just wants to reinstall the component so that it might work and leave the tables where all the code is, all the data that he's put. Not sure that Owen would ever do that. But, yeah.
You just reinstall the extension twice. That's what you do.
Why do you have to reinstall it twice? You keep giving this information. Why does that happen?
So there is a bug that I have been reporting since 2014, and I was told that I'm insane until David Yardin also ran into the same problem, and then they stopped telling me that I'm insane. In very, very, very few cases, you might try to install an extension that's a different version than the one already installed, and Joomla will not copy all of the new files. I have figured out that it happens when there is a discrepancy, a difference in the top level extension folders between one version and the next, which also means that in Joomla 4, it's going to disappear because you don't have different top level folders. But if you do have different top level folders, for some sites it happens. We haven't figured out why it happens so rarely. It's been 8 years. I have tried to figure it out. David has tried to figure it out. David has tried to figure it out. What's his name? Daniele Rosario from Zoolanders has tried to figure it out. We know it happens. We don't know why. If you install the second time, it works. So install twice to be sure, because your issue might actually be that Joomla screwed up the update. As for component creator, it does many weird things, and I don't know what to tell you. The thing is that if you put an option in the core to not remove the tables, and you uninstall an extension, then you install it again, it's not going to update the database schema. It's not going to update the structure of the tables, which means that your life will suck if your site is not broken. Laura knows. Laura, I see your consternation. It has happened to you. Yeah, it has happened to everybody. We all had that idea. Hey, I know what to do. I'm going to uninstall the extension, restore the tables, and then install it again. Boom. Yeah. This is exactly why Joomla does not provide this kind of option. And this is why extension developers shouldn't provide this option.
But it's quite common in like software when you uninstall it on Windows or something that it says, do you want to keep the data or not?
Yes, but it's not a database, is it? It's not
Yeah,
structured data.
the thing is, the core could see if the data structure is up to date or not, but it cannot see if the content is up to date. Yeah, and the extension developer, of course, can write their create table in a way that it says if not exists. That's meanwhile supported by all kinds of databases, but nothing can keep him from inserting then fixed records into his own table a second time. So is everything every content in the table is then duplicate, you know. So whatever you
cannot
think
do an alter
through,
table.
you can maybe solve a part of the problem, but at the end you may have a complete mess of things being duplicated or things having the wrong structure. So that's the reason why it makes no sense to go that way.
The biggest problem is that you cannot do a conditional alter table in Standard MySQL. You would have to be able to create stored procedures to do that. And since this is not allowed on most commercial hosts, it means that you would only be able to write an extension that only runs on a dedicated server, which means that it's useless. There is a solution to that. It's something that we had discussed with George Wilson many years ago. It's something that I was doing in FOF3. However, it makes writing SQL files much harder. You really need to understand what's going on and have a deeper understanding of MySQL. So it's not something that is ultimately a good thing to include in the core. So the best solution right now is to uninstall all your tables as you're uninstalling your extension.
Or you have a good extension which offers you the possibility to export and import data. Some extensions do that. So you in fact you can set up your Fokker guest books and things, and can save that. Fokker Guestbook is maybe a bad example because they have an own mechanism to migrate their data if you install again. But if you have such an extension, you can save the data and later can uninstall, install again, and import it again. That would be the nice way.
It depends on how big is your data. Let me give you an example. In a Kiba release system, I'm keeping at least 2 years of download logs, which are millions of records. Backing it up or exporting it, which is basically the same thing, takes about 8 minutes for all those records. You can't do it in one page load. So Joomla would basically need to have a Kiba backup and ANSI built into it to be able to do that. Otherwise, it would fail. And the problem is that these solutions work great if you can do the upkeep and there's nobody that can do that in the core. Sorry. It's why I was laughing when what's his face? Hannes was saying that Joomla should have its own core backup solution. I'm like, yeah, you tried that 18 years ago, and it was so bad that you had to remove it because you could not do the upkeep. You could not do you cannot get the direct feedback from the users. You cannot do the direct support for the users, and you cannot do the quick releases to make sure that it will actually work. And you don't even have one person to be able to manage the architecture for that. So if you ask me if this can happen for core Joomla, yes, if you have very little data and your site is so small that you actually don't really need to export the data. For anything else, it's not going to happen. Someone asked if you can back up extension content in Akiba. Yes, you can. You can take a database only backup and you can exclude all tables except those that which belong to the extension. If you have the pro version, you can even use the regular expression filters, which lets you do that very, very fast.
Great. Well, I think we're almost out of time here, but that's got quite a lot of questions. Will your slides be available so that people can refresh?
If you want me to, yes, I can do that. I will send you an email.
Great.
I will try to export this as a PDF. It won't have the nice animated backgrounds.
Okay. No, that's fine. Animated PDF. Okay.
All right. So thank you very much.
And thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicholas. That was great.